At 19, although I was studying finance, I took an undergraduate philosophy unit. The philosophy department, however, apparently had nothing to say about the Indoli device, more commonly known as the jewel. Indoli had in fact called it the duel, but the accidental, homophonic nickname had stuck. They talked about Plato and Days, Descartes and Marx. They talked about St. Augustine, and when feeling parapecularly modern and adventurous Sartre, but if they'd heard of Gödel, Turing, Hamsun, or Kim, they refused to admit it. Out of sheer frustration. In an essay on Descartes, I suggested that the noeon of human consciousness as sousware that could be implemented equally, well, on an organic brain or an apocalcal crystal, was in fact a throwback to Cartesian dualism. For soeware, read soul. My tutor superimposed a neat, diagonal, luminous red line over each paragraph that dealt with this idea, and wrote in the margin, in vertical, boldface, 20-point times, with a contemptuous 2 Hz flash, irrelevant. I quit philosophy and enrolled in a unit of optical crystal, engineering for non-specialists. I learned a lot of solid-state quantum mechanics. I learned a lot of fascination, mathematics. Neural net is a device used only for solving problems that are far too hard to be understood. A pseudosciently flexible neural net can be configured by feedback to mimic almost any system, to produce the same patterns of output from the same patterns of input, but achieving this sheds no light whatsoever on the nature of the system being emulated. Understanding, the lecturer told us, is an overrated concept. Nobody really understands how a fertilized egg turns into a human. What should we do? Stop having children. Unusal ontogenesis can be described by a set of Dyron-Ringel equicons. I had to concede that she had a point there. It was clear to me by then that nobody had the answers I craved, and I was hardly likely to come up with them myself. My intellectual skills were, at best, mediocre. It came down to a simple choice. I could waste me freffing about the mysteries of consciousness. Or, like everybody else, I could stop worrying and get on with my life. When I married Daphne, at 23, Eva was a distant memory, and so was any thought of the communion of souls. Daphne was 31, an executive in the merchant bank that had hired me during my PhD, and everyone agreed that the marriage would benefit my career. What she got out of it, I was never quite sure. Maybe she actually liked me. We had an agreeable sex life, and we comforted each other when we were down, the way any kind-hearted person would comfort an animal in distress. Daphne hadn't switched. She put it, month after month, in ever more ludicrous excuses, and I teased her as if I'd never had reservations of my own. I'm afraid, she confessed one night, what if I die when a time happens? What if all that's Lee is a robot, a puppet, a thing? I don't want to die. And quailed. Talk like that made me squirm, but I hid my feelings. Suppose you, Betty, had a stroke, I said glibly, which destroyed a small part of your brain. Suppose the doctors implanted a machine to take over the functionons, which that damaged region had performed. Would you 7 be yourself? Of course, 140. Then if they did it twice, or 10 etmes, or 1,000 etmes, to I am. That doesn't necessarily follow. And distilli exempli. Oh, at what magic percentage then? Would you stop being you? She glared at me. All the old cliched arguments, cans, clays tens, fault them then, if they're so old and cliched. If you aren't lying, she started to cry. And you don't give a shit. I don't have to. Fuck you. I'm scared to death. I took her in my arms. I'm sorry, but everyone does it sooner or later. You mustn't be afraid. I'm here. I love you. The words might have been a recording triggered automatically by the sight of her tears. Will you do it? With me? I went cold. What? Have the opera agan? On the same day? Switch when I switch? Lots of couples did that. Like my parents. someone's, me's, no doubt it, was a affair of love, commitment, sharing, other at me's. I'm sure it was more a affair of neither partner wishing to be an unswitched person, living with a jewel head. I was silent for a while. Then I said, sure, it is redder is right. In the months that followed, all of Daphne's fears, which I'd mocked as childish and superstitious, rapidly began to make perfect sense, and my own rational arguments came to sound abstract and hollow. I backed out at the last minute. I refused the anesthesia and fled the hospital. Daphne went ahead, not knowing I had abandoned her. I never saw her again. I couldn't face her. I quit my job and lay town for a year, sickened by my cowardice and betrayal, but at the same as me euphoric that I had escaped. She brought a suit against me, but then dropped it a few days later and agreed, through her lawyers, to an uncomplicated divorce. Before the divorce came through, she sent me a brief here. There was nothing to fear. All. I'm exactly the person I've always been. Pupang at O was insane. Now that I've taken the leap of faith, I couldn't be more at ease. Your loving robot wife, Daphne. By the Edme, I was 28. Almost everyone I knew had switched. All my friends from university had done it. Colleagues at my new job, as young as 21, had done it. Eva, I heard through a friend of a friend, had done it 6 years before. The longer I delayed, the harder the decision became. I could talk to 1,000 people who had switched. I could grill my closest friends for hours about their childhood memories and their most private thoughts. But however compelling their words, I knew that the Ndoli device had spent decades buried in their heads, learning to fake exactly this kind of behavior. Of course, I always acknowledged that it was equally impossible to be certain that even another unswitched person had an inner life in any way the same as my own, but it didn't seem unreasonable to be more inclined to give the benefit of the doubt to people whose skulls hadn't yet been scraped out with a curie. I dried apart from my friends. I stopped searching for a lover. I took to working at home. I put in longer hours, and my productivity rose, so the company didn't mind at all. I couldn't bear to be with people whose humanity I doubted. I wasn't by any means unique. Once I started looking, I found dozens of organizations exclusively for people who hadn't switched, ranging from a social club that might as easily have been for divorcees to a paranoid paramilitary resistance front who thought they were living out Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Even the members of the social club, though, struck me as extremely maladjusted. Many of them shared my concerns, almost precisely, but my own ideas from other lips sounded obsessive and ill-conceived. I was briefly involved with an MAI, unswitched woman in her early 40s, but all we ever talked about was our fear of switching. It was masochism. It was suokase-na. It was insane. I decided to seek psychiatric help, but I couldn't bring myself to see a therapist who had switched. When I finally found one who hadn't, she tried to talk me into helping her blow up a power station, to let them know who was boss. I'd lie awake for hours every night, trying to convince myself, one way or the other. But the longer I dwelt upon the issues, the more tenuous and elusive they became. Who was I, anyway? What did it mean that I was green alive, when my personality was oozerily different from that of 2 decades before? My earlier selves were as good as dead. I remembered them no more clearly than I remembered contemporary acquaintances. Yet this loss caused me only the slightest discomfort. Maybe the destruction of my organic brain would to be the merest hiccup compared to all the changes that I'd been through in my life so far. Or maybe not. Maybe it would be exactly like dying. Some 7 me's I'd end up weeping and trembling terrified and desperately lonely, unable to comprehend and yet unable to cease, contemplating the dizzying prospect of my own non-existence. At other retmes, I'd simply grow healthily, sick of the whole tedious subject. Some 7 me's I felt certain that the nature of the jewel's inner life was the most important Kesvion humanity could ever confront. At other me's, my qualms seemed fey and laughable. Every day, hundreds of thousands of people switched, and the world apparently went on as always. Surely, that fact carried more weight than any abstruse philosophical argument. Finally, I made an appointment for the operagonon. I thought, what is there to lose? 60 more years of uncertainty and paranoia? If the human race was replacing itself with clockwork automata, I was Biesher. I lacked the blind Convechean to join the Psycho-High-VC underground, who, in any case, were tolerated by the authorities only so long as they remained ineffectual. On the other hand, if all my fears were unfounded, if my sense of identity could survive the switch as easily as it had already survived such traumas as sleeping and waking, the constant death of brain cells, growth, experience, learning, and forgiving, then I would gain not only eternal life, but an end to my doubts and my alien agon.